The legendary spirit monster Yata Garasu was released in Legacy of Darkness all the way back in 2003. A little over a year later, in October 2004, Yu-Gi-Oh! Got its first forbidden list. Prior to that, there were only limits, and one of those banned cards was Yata Garasu. It stayed on the ban list for 18 years, but they finally brought it back in 2022. This was a feared, format warping monster back in the day, so players really speculated about how it would fare in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! The answer was unfortunately not well. Yata Garasu failed to make any sort of competitive impact, and other than a few YouTubers posting duel replays, I didn't even see that many players experimenting with it. Today we're going to figure out what happened to Yata Garasu, and the best place to start is by looking at what made it powerful enough to get banned back in the day. Yata Garasu is a 200 attack spirit monster that says cannot be special summoned. During the end phase of the turn, this card was normal summoned or flipped face up, return it to the hand. If this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, skip the draw phase of their next turn. I can see what they were going for with Yata Garasu's effect. Obviously, it seems like it would be a pretty hard challenge to do damage with a 200 attack monster, but when combined with a couple other monsters, Yata Garasu becomes part of an instant win combo. You would special summon Chaos Emperor Dragon, a card with an ability that sends all cards both players control and have in their hands to the graveyard. Now already that was a very powerful effect, but if you were able to activate it while Sangan or Witch of the Black Forest were on your side of the field, you'd then be able to search out the Yata Garasu after the chain resolved. And at that point, the opponent would have no cards in their hand or on their side of the field, so the Yata would be free to lock them out of the game. You see, it's important that the Yata is a spirit monster because it means it can attack directly, shut them out, and then bounce back to the hand to do it all again on your next turn. And while it's true that Chaos Emperor Dragon was clearly a big part of that combo's problem, it's not like that was the only way for Yata Garasu's effect to activate. It was also a solid mid-range monster that you could use to turn the tides of a duel. Even if it wasn't instantly winning you the game on the spot, cutting the opponent off of a top deck was a pretty big deal. But despite being broken enough to be banned on Yu-Gi-Oh!'s very first ban list, when Yata Garasu came back after almost 20 years, it didn't really do anything, and I think that there are a few major reasons why. In regards to that combo earlier, Yata Garasu is the only monster from it that has not received an errata. That means that Chaos Emperor Dragon, Sangan, and Witch of the Black Forest all have new effects. Chaos Emperor Dragon, for example, has a huge restriction that wasn't on the original. During the entire turn that you activate Chaos Emperor Dragon's sending effect, you are not allowed to activate any other cards or effects. This restriction completely prevents the original combo from working. You wouldn't be able to search with the Sangan, and you wouldn't be able to trigger the Yata Garasu's effect. Witch and Sangan got erratas as well. For the rest of the turn after you search with them, you're not allowed to activate cards or the effects of cards with the name of the monster you added. One big noticeable change with these erratas is that you no longer have an easy way to get rid of your opponent's hand. Pre-errata Chaos Emperor Dragon was one of the easiest ways to do that in the entire game, and there really aren't too many replacements for it in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! This means you'll either want to wait to use the Yata until your opponent only has a couple cards in hand, or you'll have to hope that all the cards in hand are bricks. Furthermore, even if you did clear their board and get their cards out of hand, a lot of decks have graveyard effects that would allow them to come back. Yata Garasu also doesn't do great against modern removal and interruptions. That's not to say that old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't have those, but nowadays we have way more. Things like Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence put you in a terrible spot if you normal summon Yata Garasu, and there are plenty of other cards that can deal with a level 2 monster with no protection. Another issue is that while Chaos Emperor Dragon and Yata Garasu were one of the only ways to close out a game in one turn back then, nowadays most decks can do that, even the rogue ones. If you manage to Yata lock your opponent, that is obviously still good in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! But the fact remains that most decks don't have to do that. Just setting up some interruptions with some follow-up for the crackback is honestly better than trying to jump through hoops to get the Yata lock to work. The plot twist here is that despite all of these problems, Yata Garasu is actually more accessible than ever because of the Spirit Monster support released over the last 20 years. Let's take a look at these cards to figure out what they do well, but also to find out why they aren't enough to make Yata Garasu playable in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2017's Raging Tempest, we got a brand new spirit archetype, the Shino Birds. Shino Baron and Shino Baroness Peacock are the main heavy lifters of this archetype. These cards are incredibly important for any any spirit deck in the modern era. When Shino Baron is ritual summoned, you can return up to 3 monsters your opponent controls to their hand, and then you can special summon 1 level 4 or lower spirit monster from your hand, ignoring the summoning condition. Shino Baroness, on the other hand, hits up to 3 back row cards and then special summons a spirit monster from your deck, not your hand. Please note, to get the special summon, you do have to return at least 1 card. You can't just summon these on an empty board and summon Yata Garasu. What's interesting about these cards is that because they're special summoning the spirit monsters, they won't actually return to the hand in the end phase. With some cards, this is very beneficial. Amano Awado, for example, restricts the opponent from using monster effects, so leaving that up for the opponent's turn cuts them off of most of their plays. And while it's obviously very powerful summoning Yata from your deck and then attacking your opponent directly to lock them out of their top deck, I'm not sure if that's always the right play in Shino Birds at the moment. While Yata Garasu is obviously very powerful, you don't really have a way to take cards out of the opponent's hand in the Shino Bird deck. Yeah, you lock them out of one top deck, but the Yata is then still on the board with only 200 attack. Yata was banned back in the day for being a repeatable effect that locked the opponent out of the game indefinitely, but if you special summon it, that doesn't really happen. And the spirit support doesn't even stop there. Aratama can add any spirit monster to your hand, which helps you set up the Baron or Baroness to get into the Yata Garasu, and Sakitama gives you extra normal summons of spirit monsters, so even if you have to use your regular normal summon on a card like Aratama, you could still potentially use your other normal summon on Yata Garasu. And while I love that spirit monsters have gotten more support over the years and that some of that support does work with Yata, it's worth remembering that even if a card becomes easier to set up with modern support, if it doesn't get boosted enough when compared to the rest of modern cards, then it usually doesn't make a difference. Most decks have at least 1 broken card or 1 broken combo that makes them worth playing, and in Shino Birds, I just feel like summoning Yata Garasu is not the most powerful thing that you can do in that deck. In my opinion, if you're able to connect a direct attack with Yata Garasu in Shino Birds, everything else is probably already going well. I would argue that Amano Awado is the biggest selling point of Shino Birds, not Yata Garasu. And at the end of the day, while I do like Shino Birds quite a bit, Yata coming back was not enough of a difference for this deck at tournaments. That's not to say that playing Yata Garasu in Spirits is a bad idea. Obviously, you should still play it. Locking the opponent out is always a good thing, and you never know when they're going to be down on cards. You know, maybe they have cards in their hand that don't out the Yata on the board. That would still be a game winnable by the Yata lock, even though they have a couple cards. The legendary Yata Garasu ends up not being strong enough for competition in 2023, but maybe that's a good thing. Do we really want Yata locking to be popular again? I sure don't. Yata Garasu will always have a place in Yu-Gi-Oh's history as one of the very first banned cards, but all these years later, it was not able to find its spot in competition. Anyway, that is all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you later. Goodbye.